The bright studio lights of the view flared to life as the theme music faded into cheers. The audience, a mix of fans, curious viewers, and those who came just to witness the show's trademark fireworks, filled the air with energy. The cameras panned across the studio, catching Whoopi Goldberg seated in her usual moderator's chair, her calm presence like a balancing weight on the often chaotic stage. Beside her sat Sunny Hostin, politely flipping through her notes. Then, at the far end of the panel, sat Joy Behar, already leaning forward, eyes sparkling with a mischievous glint, the kind that warned everyone she was in no mood to play nice. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi announced with her trademark mix of warmth and authority. "Our guest today is one of Hollywood's most recognizable names. You know him from The Fighter, Ted, The Departed, and countless other hits. Please give a big welcome to Mark Wahlberg." The audience erupted into applause, whistles, and shouts. Mark Wahlberg strode confidently onto the stage, his Boston roots evident in the swagger of his step. Dressed in a sharp navy suit without a tie, he managed to blend casual with polished, Hollywood charm layered over the grit of someone who never entirely left the streets behind. His smile was easy, practiced, but genuine enough to win over the crowd. He shook Whoopi's hand warmly, gave Sunny a polite nod, and then turned toward Joy, who greeted him with a wide smile that somehow felt just a little too sharp. "Mark Wahlberg, everyone," Joy said into her mic, the tone teetering between welcoming and sarcastic. Hollywood tough guy, producer, entrepreneur, and apparently a very busy man. Mark took his seat at the guest chair, adjusting the mic clip to his lapel. "Thanks for having me," he said, flashing that boyish grin that had sold tickets for decades. "Always good to be here." The applause quieted, and for a moment, things felt light. Whoopi opened with a gentle softball. "So Mark, you've got a new film out. Tell us about it. What drew you to the role?" Mark leaned forward, folding his hands on the table. "It's a story about redemption," he began. "About a man who's made mistakes but is trying to do right, to rebuild his life. I think a lot of people can connect with that. It's about hope, second chances." But before he could finish, Joy cut in with a quick, sing-song laugh. "Oh, redemption. That's a theme you know a little something about, huh?" The audience chuckled nervously. Mark's smile faltered, just slightly, but he pressed on. "Yeah, I do, actually. I think it's something we all." Joy leaned on her elbow, tilting her head with mock curiosity. "I mean, let's be honest, Mark. You've had an interesting career. Angry cop, angry boxer, angry soldier. Do you ever get tired of playing the same guy over and over again?" The room stilled. Sunny's eyes flicked to Joy in quiet alarm. Whoopi cleared her throat softly, but said nothing. The tension was already starting to thicken. Mark chuckled lightly, shaking his head. "Well, I like to think each character has something unique to say. If you look closely, they're not the same. They've got layers." "Oh, I look closely," Joy shot back, her grin widening. "I just don't see any layers. Angry, Boston accent, tight t-shirt. Rinse and repeat." A smattering of laughter came from the crowd, but it was uneasy, split between those who enjoyed the jab and those who felt it land too harshly. Mark sat up straighter now, his jaw tightening slightly, though his voice stayed calm. "I've been blessed to play a lot of different roles, some tougher than others, but I don't take anything for granted." "Blessed?" Joy echoed, raising her eyebrows. "Or just lucky to ride the same one-note character all the way to the bank?" Gasps echoed through the audience this time. Mark smiled faintly, but his eyes flickered with the first spark of irritation. "Look, Joy, I've worked hard. Nothing was handed to me. I came from nothing and built a career. If people see themselves in those characters, then I've done my job." Joy's smirk didn't falter. She leaned forward, her voice just loud enough to cut the air. "Come on, Mark. You left nothing behind a long time ago. Now you're a Beverly Hills millionaire telling real working-class people you're still one of them. Doesn't that feel a little dishonest?" The crowd murmured again. Some clapped, some booed. Whoopi shot Joy a warning look. Sunny fidgeted with her pen. Mark's smile dropped completely now. His Boston accent sharpened just a touch as he replied, "That's a hell of an assumption, Joy. You don't know me. You don't know what I've done off camera, or who I am when the lights are off." "Oh, I know what I see," Joy said crisply, her grin icy. "And what I see is a guy who traded in his street cred for a mansion and a stylist." Mark leaned back slightly, folding his arms across his chest. The air around him seemed to thrum with restrained energy, like a boxer waiting for the bell. "You've got a lot to say for someone who doesn't actually know me." The audience gasped softly, picking up on the shift. The banter was no longer light. It was cutting, sharp-edged. The temperature in the studio had risen. Joy smirked wider, sensing she'd struck a nerve. "Oh, trust me, Mark," she said. "We're just getting started." The crowd erupted, some in applause, some in groans. Whoopi raised her hand for calm, her expression unreadable. Sunny pursed her lips tightly. Mark, though, didn't look rattled. His eyes locked on Joy's, his voice low but steady. "Good, because so am I." The moment stretched. Two personalities, two careers, two lives that couldn't be more different, locked in an early clash that felt destined to spiral. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the tension, the sweat on Mark's temple, the glint in Joy's eye. The audience shifted uneasily in their seats, realizing they weren't just watching an interview, they were watching a battle ignite. And that was only the beginning. The commercial break ended, and the cameras swept back over the set of The View. The audience was still buzzing from the sharp exchange in Act 1, their whispers bouncing off the walls like nervous static. A few people in the crowd leaned forward, eyes glued to the stage. They knew something had shifted. What started as a promotional interview had morphed into something more unpredictable. The music faded, and Behar wasted no time reclaiming the spotlight. She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, her expression carrying that half-smirk she was famous for, the one that blurred the line between playful and hostile. "So, Mark," she began, her tone syrupy sweet but her words edged with steel. "Your new movie. Let me guess. Another angry Boston guy who solves his problems with his fists. Or did you finally try something new this time?" A ripple of nervous laughter threaded through the audience. Whoopi pressed her lips together and glanced down at her notes, as though silently begging the segment to steer back towards safer waters. Sunny shifted in her seat, her pen tapping lightly against her notepad. Mark Wahlberg, however, didn't flinch. His jaw tightened slightly, but he forced a faint smile, folding his hands neatly on the table. "That's cute, Joy," he said evenly. "But if you'd watch more than a trailer, you'd know the film's about redemption. About someone trying to right their wrongs and make something better of themselves. It's not about fists. It's about second chances." Joy clapped her hands together in mock applause. "Redemption. Oh, what a perfect theme, considering your own colorful history." The words hit the air like a slap. Gasps spread through the audience. Even Sunny's head shot up from her notes, her eyebrows raised in warning. Mark leaned forward, his smile gone now. "You want to talk about my past," he said quietly, the hint of his Boston accent sharpening. "I've owned up to everything I've done. I've worked my ass off to make sure people know me for the man I am today, not the mistakes I made decades ago." Joy's smirk deepened. "Owned up, or swept under the rug while Hollywood polished your image. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're still cashing checks off the same tough guy act while pretending you've turned over some noble new leaf." A low murmur rose from the audience, some booing, some clapping, others exchanging uneasy glances. Mark exhaled sharply through his nose, but his voice stayed measured. "That's a hell of an accusation, Joy. You don't know me. You don't know the people I've helped, the charities I've supported, the work I've done to try and make things right." "Oh, I know what I see," Joy countered, raising her eyebrows as if delivering a punchline. "And what I see is a guy who's made a career out of playing himself, an angry kid from Boston who never really grew up. You just got better suits." The crowd groaned audibly this time. Whoopi lifted her hand slightly. "Maybe we should let Mark," she began. But Joy waved her off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. Mark sat back slightly in his chair, but his eyes never left hers. The composure was still there, but the storm was building. You've got a lot of opinions about me, he said slowly. But it sounds more like you're talking about yourself. The audience gasped. Sunny's lips parted in shock. Even Whoopi's eyebrows shot up. Joy's cheeks flushed red, but she leaned forward, her voice rising. Oh, don't try to turn this on me, Mark. We're talking about you, your movies, your career, and I'm not done yet. Mark shook his head, a humorless laugh slipping out. No, you're not. Because tearing people down is what you do, isn't it? It's your whole shtick. You sit here, day after day, making cheap shots at people who actually put themselves on the line. The audience broke into uneven applause, some shouting encouragement, others booing. The divide was growing, and the tension was becoming unbearable. Joy smirked wider, as if feeding off the heat. Cheap shots. Please. I'm just saying what everyone else is already thinking, but too polite to say out loud. Isn't that the point of this show? Mark leaned forward now, his elbows resting on the table, his voice lower but sharper. No, the point of this show is to have a conversation. But what you're doing right now, that's not conversation. That's performance. And it's not even a good one. The room went still. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the lights above the set. Joy's smile thinned, but her eyes glittered. Performance, says the guy who's been performing his whole life. You've built a career pretending to be the tough guy, the underdog, the working-class hero. But the truth is, you left all that behind the moment you signed your first $1 million contract. Mark's nostrils flared, his voice now laced with controlled fury. I'll never forget where I came from. And I'll never stop being proud of the people I represent. People who know what it's like to work hard, to struggle, and to fight for every inch. You don't get to tell me I left that behind. You don't know me. The audience erupted, some clapping furiously, others shaking their heads. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Joy leaned back in her chair, arms crossed smugly, her smirk unshaken. Maybe I don't know you, Mark, but I know a fraud when I see one. That was a moment the room seemed to tilt. Gasps echoed across the studio. Whoopi's eyes widened. Sunny shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the producers standing just off stage. Mark's fist clenched under the table, his knuckles white. For a long, tense beat, he said nothing, his jaw working as though he were biting back words that could never be unsaid. Then, slowly, he leaned back, his expression hard, his voice low and deliberate. You've got a lot of nerve, Joy. But keep talking, because every word out of your mouth says more about you than it does about me. The audience gasped again, caught in the crossfire of words. The cameras zoomed in tighter, capturing the fiery tension between them. Sunny cleared her throat softly, her voice tentative. Maybe we should move on. But Joy didn't budge. She leaned forward once more, her voice cold and cutting. Oh, no, we're just getting started. And Mark's faint, dangerous smirk told everyone watching that the battle lines were officially drawn. The red light of the camera blinked again, signaling they were live after a brief commercial. But this time, the air in the studio was different. The audience, once quick to laugh and clap, now sat stiffly in their seats, unsure whether to laugh at Joy's sharp remarks or recoil at the crackling tension between her and Mark. Even Whoopi's usually warm presence felt subdued, as though she too sensed this segment was spinning beyond control. Joy Behar leaned forward, clearly emboldened by the previous exchange. Her eyes glittered with a mix of defiance and provocation. Mark, she said, her tone deceptively casual, you talk about redemption, second chances, and remembering where you came from. But let's be honest here. Your past is a lot darker than most people remember. Don't you think that's worth addressing instead of dancing around? The audience murmured nervously. Some shifted in their seats. Others glanced at each other with wide eyes. Everyone knew what she was hinting at. Mark Wahlberg's jaw tightened. He sat up straighter in his chair, his Boston accent breaking through faintly as he replied. I've addressed my past, Joy, more than once. I've never hidden from it. But dragging it out on daytime TV just for the sake of spectacle, what's that supposed to prove? Joy smirked, tilting her head as if savoring the discomfort. It proves you're not as squeaky clean as you like to paint yourself. People look at you now, big movie star, family man, entrepreneur, and forget the mistakes you made. But I haven't forgotten, and I don't think the public should either." The words hung heavy in the air. Whoopi shifted in her chair, her brow furrowed. "Joy," she said cautiously, but Joy didn't break stride. Mark leaned forward now, his hands clasped together, his voice low but searing. "You want to talk about my past? Fine. I made mistakes when I was young. I did things I regret. I've spent decades trying to make amends, to do better, to be better. And guess what? That's what redemption is about. Owning your mistakes and moving forward." Joy's laugh rang out, sharp and dismissive. Owning them, or just building a Hollywood redemption arc out of them. Because, let's face it, nothing sells better than a bad boy who pretends has changed. Gasps filled the room. Some audience members booed softly, others clapped, as if torn between loyalty to the celebrity guest and admiration for Joy's audacity. Mark's nostrils flared as he leaned back, his gaze locked on hers. "You're confusing Hollywood with real life, Joy. What I've done off camera, the people I've helped, the work I've put into my community, that's not PR. That's personal." Joy raised her eyebrows mockingly. "Oh, right. Because nothing says humility like starring in another multi-million-dollar action flick while lecturing the rest of us about working-class values." The jab drew laughter from a handful of audience members, but it wasn't the warm, unified laugh the producers hoped for. It was fractured, uneasy. Mark's voice sharpened. "You've got some nerve. You sit here every day in your chair, tearing people apart, and calling it journalism. But what have you done, Joy, besides throw stones from behind a desk?" The audience erupted, some clapping loudly in support of Mark, others gasping at the sheer boldness of his words. Joy's face darkened, her smirk faltering for just a second before returning, sharper than ever. "What have I done?" she repeated, her voice rising. "I've spoken truth to power. I've called people out. I made sure people like you don't get away with rewriting history." Mark exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head. "Truth to power. This isn't truth. This is cruelty dressed up as entertainment. And if you think digging up decades-old mistakes makes you righteous, you're wrong. It makes you petty." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Even Sunny, who had remained quiet, set down her pen and stared openly at the two, clearly unsettled. Joy slammed her palm on the table, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "Petty? No, Mark. What's petty is pretending you've changed while cashing in on the same tough guy persona. You're a fraud, and someone needs to say it." That word, fraud, landed heavier than anything else that night. The room went dead silent. The studio lights seemed hotter, harsher, pressing down on the table where Mark sat stiffly, his knuckles whitening against the polished surface. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "You've called me a lot of things tonight, Joy, but let me be very clear. I'm not a fraud. I've lived through things you couldn't imagine. I've worked to rise above them. And the people who know me, who've walked with me, who've been helped by me, they know the truth. You don't get to rewrite that." The crowd erupted in uneven applause. Some shouted his name, others shook their heads, the divide in the room widening by the second. Joy leaned forward, her grin venomous. "Oh, so now you're the victim. Poor Mark Wahlberg, misunderstood millionaire. How tragic." Mark leaned forward too, his eyes burning. "I'm not the victim. I'm the guy sitting here taking every one of your shots and still standing. Because unlike you, Joy, I don't need to tear people down to feel important." The words hit the air like dynamite. Whoopi raised her hands, her voice firm now. Okay, let's take a breath." But it was too late. The tension had already spilled over. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail, the sharp glint in Joy's eyes, the steel in Mark's jawline, the uncomfortable shifting of the co-hosts, and the frozen shock of the audience. The studio was no longer a talk show set. It was a battlefield, and both sides were fully engaged. Mark leaned back in his chair, his face set, his voice low but firm. "You know what, Joy? Keep talking. Because every insult, every jab, every cheap shot you take, it doesn't make me smaller. It makes you smaller, and everybody watching knows it. The audience roared, clapping and cheering louder than they had all night. Joy, refusing to yield, leaned in one last time, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, Mark, you keep telling yourself that. Because at the end of the day, all I see is another Hollywood tough guy playing dress-up." Mark's smirk returned, faint but dangerous. "And all I see," he said softly, "is someone who can't stand when the spotlight isn't on her." The crowd erupted again, some standing, some booing, others clapping furiously. The stage had become a war zone, and both fighters had landed their blows. But everyone in the room could feel it. The real explosion was still coming, and Mark Wahlberg was closer than ever to his breaking point. The studio lights hummed overhead, hotter now, as if amplifying the unease that had settled over the view set. The tension in the room was palpable, so heavy it felt like the oxygen had thinned. The audience sat rigid, caught in the storm, eyes darting between Mark Wahlberg, who sat stiffly with his arms folded, and Behar, who leaned forward with that familiar smirk that seemed to grow sharper with every passing second. When the commercial break ended, the red tally light blinked back on. They were live again. The producers in the wings looked uneasy, whispering frantically into headsets, but none dared to interrupt. The ratings would be huge, they knew. And this was the kind of television that made headlines. Joy wasted no time. She laced her fingers together, tilted her head with exaggerated sweetness, and spoke into the microphone with a voice dripping in sarcasm. "So, Mark, tell me, do you ever get tired of pretending? Pretending to be the relatable guy from Boston? Pretending to be the hero? Pretending to be humble while living like a king?" The audience gasped audibly. A woman in the front row covered her mouth. Mark's expression hardened. He took a slow breath before replying, his voice low but tight with control. "You've got some nerve, Joy. I came here to talk about my work, my projects, the things I care about. But instead, you've turned this into an interrogation. You're not asking questions. You're picking a fight." Joy raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mark. Did you want me to sit here and fawn over you? Tell you how brilliant you are? Because trust me, there's enough Hollywood people out there doing that already." Mark leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "No, I wanted a conversation. What you're doing isn't conversation, it's humiliation. And if you think that's clever, you're wrong. It's cruel." The audience let out a collective murmur, some clapping in agreement, others gasping at the sharpness of his words. Joy sat back, crossing her arms smugly. "Cruel," she repeated, her tone mocking. "Please, this is the view, Mark. If you can't handle a little heat, maybe you should stick to scripted lines on a movie set." Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. His Boston accent broke through now, heavier, rougher. "You don't know the first thing about handling heat, Joy. You sit behind this desk, day after day, taking shots at people who actually put themselves on the line. You think that makes you tough? It doesn't. It makes you bitter." The audience erupted, half clapping, half booing. The divide was clearer now than ever before. Joy leaned forward again, her smile sharpened to a blade. "Bitter? Oh, please. You think I'm bitter because I'm not swooning over the Mark Wahlberg redemption story? I see through you, and so does everyone else. You're not some working-class hero. You're a brand, a product. You've cashed in your street cred for designer suits and big paychecks. Admit it." Mark's fists clenched on the table, the muscles in his jaw twitching as he fought to maintain composure. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a steely whisper that carried across the hushed room. "You want me to admit something? Fine. I'll admit this. I've worked harder than you could ever imagine to build a better life, to rise above the mistakes I made when I was young, to provide for my family, to give back to my community. You call that selling out. I call that surviving. And I don't owe you, or anyone, an apology for it." The crowd erupted in applause, some rising to their feet. But just as quickly, others booed, the sound mixing into a chaotic swirl of noise. Joy slammed her palm against the table again, her voice rising. "Surviving. Don't insult people who are actually surviving, Mark. People out there working 2 jobs just to feed their kids. You don't know that struggle anymore. You don't live that life. You live in mansions. You walk red carpets. And you sit here and pretend you're one of them? That's not survival. That's theater. Mark leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a hard line. For a moment, it looked as if he might not respond. But then he did, his voice sharper than ever. And what about you, Joy? You sit here every day, pretending to speak for the people, pretending you're the voice of reason, the moral compass. But all you do is tear people down, mock them, belittle them. That's not speaking for the people. That's feeding your own ego. The audience gasped, then erupted again, applause and boos colliding. Whoopi finally tried to cut in, her voice loud but steady. Okay, let's take a breath. We're here to talk about Mark's movie, not. But neither of them blinked. Joy leaned across the table, her eyes blazing. You want to talk ego, Mark? Fine. Let's talk about yours. You built a career on your abs and your accent. And you really believe that makes you a serious actor? You've played the same guy in every movie for 20 years. Tough guy from Boston, tough guy from New York, tough guy from the military. It's all the same. You're a one-trick pony, and deep down, you know it. The words landed like a punch. Gasps echoed across the studio. Mark's nostrils flared, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly the tendons stood out in his forearms. Then, slowly, he released them, leaning forward again, his voice low but laced with fire. You think you've got me figured out? You don't know me. You don't know what drives me. You don't know the sacrifices I've made. You sit there with your smike, thinking you're exposing me, but all you're really exposing is your own bitterness. The audience was on edge now, leaning forward in their seats, whispering furiously. The producers in the wings looked panicked, signaling wildly, but the cameras stayed locked on the clash. Joy smirked again, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, don't flatter yourself, Mark. You're not that complicated. You're just another Hollywood guy who thinks he's deeper than he really is. Mark's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. He leaned closer, his words measured, deliberate, like bullets. And you're just another host who thinks cruelty equals honesty. But here's the truth, Joy. Honesty without kindness is just cruelty. And that's all you've got. The audience gasped, then burst into applause, louder than ever before. Joy's face flushed. She opened her mouth, ready to retort, but for the first time that night, she hesitated, thrown off balance by the weight of his words. Her smirk faltered just slightly, and Mark seized the silence. He leaned back in his chair, his voice steady now, though his eyes still burned. You wanted a fight, Joy. Congratulations. You've got one. But remember this. People watching at home can see the difference. They know the truth when they hear it. And tonight, they know who's being real and who's just putting on a show. The audience erupted into thunderous applause, some whistling, others shouting his name. Joy sat back, her arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't smile this time. The smugness was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. The battle lines had been drawn, and everyone knew the next act wouldn't just be heated, it would be explosive. The set of The View had become less like a talk show and more like an arena. The bright studio lights, normally warm and inviting, now seemed to glare down with an unrelenting harshness. The audience, once lively, sat still and tense, waiting for the next spark. And the sparks were flying faster now, each one threatening to ignite a full-on blaze. Mark Wahlberg leaned forward, his hands pressed firmly on the table, his eyes locked on Joy Behar like a fighter sizing up his opponent. His face was calm on the surface, but his jaw was clenched so tightly the muscles quivered. Joy, meanwhile, wore that same infamous smirk. But beneath it, her eyes glittered with a sharper edge now. She was pressing, poking, daring him to slip. She thrived on provocation, and today she was all in. So, Mark, Joy said, her tone sharp and cutting, you keep talking about authenticity, about being real. But isn't it true that your whole career has been about polishing an image? The tough guy with a heart of gold, the Boston boy made good. Isn't that just another act? The audience gasped softly. Mark exhaled slowly through his nose, tilting his head as though weighing his next words carefully. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but laced with heat. You know what's funny, Joy? You call it an act. I call it my life. I've lived every part of it. The mistakes, the struggles, the grind, the success. And if people see something in my work that inspires them, that connects with them, then that's not an act. That's the truth. Applause rippled across the audience, though it was quickly stifled as Joy leaned forward again, unwilling to yield. The truth, she repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. The truth is you've spent decades cashing checks off the same story. Same roles, same persona. You package it up and sell it again and again. That's not truth, Mark. That's business. Mark's lips tightened into a thin line. He gave a short laugh, humorless, shaking his head slightly. You know, Joy, you keep talking about business, like you're above it. But you've built a career sitting in that chair, making your name by tearing other people down. That's your business. Maybe that's why you don't recognize mine. The audience reacted instantly, half clapping, half groaning, the sound splitting the room like a jagged crack. Whoopi raised a hand, trying to calm things down. Okay, let's just. But Joy cut across her voice rising. Don't you dare compare what I do to what you do. I hold people accountable. I don't let celebrities come on here and sell their fairy tales without being challenged. If you can't handle tough questions, maybe you should stick to making movies and avoid live TV. Mark's eyes darkened. His voice rose slightly now, sharp as a blade. Accountability, that's what you call this. This isn't accountability, Joy. This is personal. You're not holding me to account. You're attacking me. And let's be honest, you decided before I even walked on this stage that nothing I said would ever be good enough. The audience gasped again, louder this time. Joy leaned back, crossing her arms smugly. Maybe because deep down, I don't buy it. You talk about redemption, about growth, but I don't see it. I see the same guy, just richer. Mark's fist curled tightly on the table now. His jaw flexed as he fought to keep his composure. Then he leaned in, his voice dropping low, deliberate, like he was speaking directly to her soul. You don't see it because you don't want to. You don't want to admit that people can change. Because if people can change, then all that bitterness you carry, everything you cling to, wouldn't mean anything anymore. And maybe that scares you. The studio went silent. Even the cameras seemed to pause. For a moment, Joy's smirk faltered, but it quickly returned, sharper, nastier. She laughed loudly, dismissively. Oh, please, spare me the pop psychology, Mark. You're not a philosopher. You're not a role model. You're an actor, a lucky one, at that. Don't pretend you're something more. That was the final spark. Mark sat back slowly, his hands moving from the table to his lap. His breathing was audible now, heavy, controlled, but betraying the storm beneath his exterior. His eyes never left hers. He spoke quietly, but the edge in his voice was undeniable. You think I'm pretending? You think I don't know who I am? Joy, I've lived through things you couldn't even imagine. I've fought my way out of streets you wouldn't survive a day on. I've made mistakes, I've paid for them, and I've spent every day since trying to be better, for my family, for my kids, for myself. That's not pretending. That's real. And if you can't see that, then maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is you. The audience erupted, half standing, clapping, others gasping at the ferocity of his words. Joy sat still, her face flushed red, her arms crossed tightly. She opened her mouth, but for the first time, no words came. Whoopi leaned in quickly, her voice tense. All right, let's just take a breath. But the damage was done. The clash had reached its peak, and there was no going back. Joy finally found her voice again, low and venomous. You're not as noble as you think you are, Mark. You're just another Hollywood tough guy who got lucky. And one day, people will realize it. Mark shook his head slowly, his lips curling into a faint, dangerous smile. Maybe, but at least I don't spend my life tearing other people down just to feel important. The audience erupted again, louder than ever before. Cheers, boos, shouts colliding into chaos. The co-hosts sat frozen, their eyes wide, hands fidgeting nervously. Mark adjusted his cufflinks with deliberate care, his voice calm now, almost too calm. You know what, Joy? I think I've had enough. You've made your point, and I think I've made mine. Joy blinked, caught off guard. Oh, what? You're leaving? Running away? Mark rose slowly from his chair, the scrape of it against the floor echoing through the silent studio. He straightened his jacket, looked down at her, and said evenly, "Not running. Walking away with my dignity." The audience exploded, half cheering, half booing, all of them on their feet. The studio was chaos, the energy electric, the cameras catching every second. Joy leaned back, her smirk faltering into something closer to unease. She muttered into her mic. Typical. But her voice was drowned out by the roar of the room. Mark glanced at the other hosts, gave a small nod, then turned toward the wings. His stride was steady, measured, every step echoing like a drumbeat. The cameras tracked him as he walked, the curtain drawing closer. Behind him, the set buzzed with pandemonium. Joy sat stiffly, arms crossed, her lips pressed tight, while Whoopi and the others exchanged anxious glances. Mark paused just before the curtain, turned slightly to face the audience, and said, his voice carrying over the noise, "You've all just seen the truth. Make of it what you will." And with that, he disappeared backstage, leaving behind a studio still reeling from the storm. The sound of the studio door swinging shut behind Mark Wahlberg seemed to echo for an eternity. For several long seconds, the view set was frozen in suspended animation. The audience sat in stunned silence, not clapping, not laughing, just wide-eyed and breathless, as though they had just witnessed a car crash in slow motion. Joy Behar sat stiffly in her chair, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin, defiant line. But despite her smirk's return, there was a faint crack in the mask, her cheeks flushed, her jaw tight, her eyes darting quickly toward the cameras before flicking back to the desk. The other co-hosts sat like statues. Whoopi Goldberg shifted uncomfortably, her brow furrowed as she tapped her note cards against the table in an attempt to regain composure. Sunny Hostin had her hands folded tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. Sarah Haynes glanced nervously toward the audience, clearly trying to assess whether the crowd was on their side or Mark's. The cameras were still rolling. Live television waits for no one. Whoopi cleared her throat, her voice heavy, deliberate. "Well, she began, leaning into her mic. "That was something." The audience gave a nervous laugh, though it quickly dissolved into silence again. Joy leaned forward, her smirk finally curling into a sharper grin. "Oh, don't act so shocked." He couldn't handle a few tough questions. Big Hollywood tough guy walks off because somebody doesn't kiss his ring. There were boos this time, mixed with a smattering of applause. The division in the room was palpable, the energy thick and uncomfortable. Sarah shifted in her seat, speaking up carefully. "Well, I mean, Joy, I think he felt like..." But Joy cut her off sharply. "Felt like what? That he should get a free pass because he's a movie star? Please, if he can dish out fake tough guy roles, he can take a real question or two." The audience murmured, clearly divided. Some clapped in agreement, but others booed louder now. The studio's producers gestured frantically from behind the cameras, signaling the co-host to pivot before things spiraled further. Whoopi exhaled, raising her hands. "Okay, folks, listen. This is The View. People come here to have conversations. Sometimes they're tough conversations. Sometimes people don't like the questions. That's the job." Joy smirked at that, clearly satisfied, but Sunny leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Sure, Whoopi, but we also have a responsibility not to belittle guests. I mean, he came here to talk about his film. I think maybe we went a little far." The audience erupted again, this time with more claps of agreement. Joy's head whipped towards Sunny, her grin fading. "Oh, please. He brought that on himself. You want to coddle him? Go ahead, but don't make me the villain just because I refuse to roll out a red carpet." Sunny didn't back down. "It's not about coddling, Joy. It's about respect. You can ask tough questions without making it personal. The tension on stage now mirrored the tension in the audience. The entire studio felt like it was sitting on a knife's edge. Finally, Whoopi stepped in again, her voice louder now, carrying weight. Okay, enough. We're going to a break. When we come back, we'll talk about something else. The cameras cut to commercial, and the studio exhaled all at once. Crew members rushed forward with water bottles and headsets, while the audience erupted into chatter. Some were loudly defending Joy, calling Wahlberg thin-skinned. Others were furious, saying Joy had ambushed him, humiliated him on national television. The studio was chaos. Backstage, Mark's publicist was already on her phone, gesturing wildly as assistants scrambled around her. Mark himself stood by the exit, his jacket still perfectly in place, his face calm but tight, the storm still flickering behind his eyes. He didn't shout. He didn't rant. Instead, he leaned against the wall, arms folded, waiting while his team whispered frantically about damage control. "Do you want to make a statement right away?" his publicist asked, phone still pressed to her ear. Mark shook his head. "No, not yet. Let it breathe. Let people see what just happened. They'll make up their own minds." Meanwhile, inside the studio, producers huddled together, debating in hushed voices. Should they issue an apology? Should Joy address the incident on air? Should they pivot and act like nothing happened? Each option carried risk. By the time the cameras returned from commercial, the energy was still tense. Whoopi, ever the professional, forced a smile. "Welcome back to The View," she said, her tone warm but tight. "As you all saw, our conversation with Mark Wahlberg ended a little unexpectedly." The audience chuckled nervously. Whoopi continued. "Now, here's the thing. We have tough conversations on this show. Always have, always will. That's what makes it The View. But at the end of the day, we want our guests to feel heard, even if they don't always like the questions. Today got heated. That happens. But the conversation continues." The audience clapped politely, though the energy remained split. Joy leaned into her mic again, clearly unwilling to leave it at that. "Listen," she said, her voice sharp. "He walked out because he couldn't take the heat. That's not on me. That's on him." Boos rained down now, louder than before. Joy's eyes widened briefly at the reaction, but she pressed on. "Hey, I'm not here to babysit actors with fragile egos. I'm here to ask what people want to know. If that makes me the bad guy, fine." The boos turned into a full wave, drowning her out. Whoopi sighed heavily, muttering, "We'll be right back," as the cameras cut to yet another commercial. Within minutes, clips of the walkout were already flooding social media. Someone had recorded it on their phone from the studio audience and posted it to Twitter with the caption, "Mark Wahlberg just stormed off The View. Joy Behar pushed too far. #Wahlberg walkout." The video exploded instantly. Retweets poured in, hashtags trended, and within an hour, it was on every platform. Instagram Reels dissected his words. TikTok users added dramatic music and captions. YouTube commentators uploaded breakdowns of the confrontation in near real time. Headlines flashed across entertainment news sites. Mark Wahlberg walks out of The View in fiery clash with Joy Behar. Daytime TV chaos. Wahlberg shuts down Behar, leaves live broadcast. Audience boos Joy Behar after Wahlberg exit. The public was split. Some praised Joy for holding a celebrity accountable, but many more slammed her for being unprofessional and hostile. Mark, on the other hand, was hailed as composed, dignified, and unwilling to let himself be humiliated. Backstage, Mark finally spoke to his team. "I'm not giving them a soundbite," he said firmly. "Not tonight. Tomorrow, maybe. Right now, I let people see it for what it was." He adjusted his jacket again, straightened his shoulders, and walked calmly out of the building into a waiting car. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but Mark simply raised a hand in acknowledgement and slid into the backseat without a word. Inside the studio, Joy tried to carry on with the next segment, but the energy was gone. The other co-hosts spoke cautiously, trying to reset the mood, but the shadow of the walkout hung heavy over every word. The View's producers already knew. This episode would be replayed, clipped, analyzed, and debated for weeks. It wasn't just an interview gone wrong. It was a cultural moment, one that would follow both Mark Wahlberg and Joy Behar far beyond that day's broadcast. And everyone watching knew the storm was only just beginning. By the time the credits rolled on The View that morning, the episode was already etched into daytime television history. The image of Mark Wahlberg standing, adjusting his jacket, and calmly walking off set while Joy Behar sneered across the desk was burned into the minds of millions. It took less than 15 minutes for clips to dominate social media. Twitter, now X, was ablaze. TikTok was flooded with edits overlaying Mark's final words with swelling music. Instagram Reels clipped together Joy's jabs and Mark's controlled responses, cutting them like a boxing match highlight reel. The hashtags came in waves. #Wahlberg Walkout, #Joy vs Mark, #The View Meltdown. The reaction was as divided as the studio audience had been. On one side were Joy's defenders, praising her for keeping it real and asking the questions no one else dared. On the other, a tidal wave of Wahlberg's supporters hailed his composure, calling his walkout an act of dignity rather than defeat. A viral tweet captured the mood perfectly. Joy tried to tear him down. Mark stood tall, then walked away. That's not weakness. That's strength. By noon, headlines dominated every entertainment site. Mark Wahlberg storms out of The View after explosive clash with Joy Behar. Daytime disaster. Audience boos as Wahlberg shuts down Behar. Mark Wahlberg walkout sparks national debate over talk show ambushes. Even mainstream outlets outside the entertainment world picked up the story. Morning radio shows replayed audio clips. Sports stations compared the interview to a live heavyweight bout. Talk radio hosts dissected every line, every gesture. And then came the celebrity reactions. On Instagram, actors Wahlberg had worked with posted in solidarity. One wrote, "That's the Mark I know, calm, collected, never taking cheap shots. Proud of him for walking away." A prominent director chimed in, "There's tough questions, and then there's disrespect." Mark Wahlberg handled himself with more class than anyone else would have in that chair. Even a few former guests of The View joined the fray, some anonymously through entertainment blogs. One reportedly said, "Going on that show is like stepping into a minefield. Joy goes for blood, and if you don't fight back, you get shredded." Mark handled it the right way. Meanwhile, Joy Behar remained uncharacteristically silent. Producers of The View released a brief statement. "At The View, we pride ourselves on creating space for spirited conversations. Sometimes those conversations get heated. We respect our guests and value their perspectives, even when things don't go as planned." It was professional, but vague, and it did nothing to quell the storm. Clips of the walkout dominated the evening news cycle. Commentators debated whether Joy had gone too far or whether Mark had simply been unprepared for scrutiny. But the public sentiment leaned heavily toward Wahlberg. That night, Mark finally broke his silence. On his official Instagram, he posted a simple, black-and-white photo of himself walking out of the studio doors, his back to the camera, shoulders squared. The caption read, "It's okay to disagree. It's okay to ask tough questions. But respect is never optional. I'll always stand for that. And when I can't find it, I'll walk away. Appreciate all the support. See you at the movies." Within hours, the post had millions of likes and hundreds of thousands of comments. Fans flooded the replies with messages of support. "You handled it perfectly." Walking away is the ultimate power move. Dignity always wins. Meanwhile, Joy's silence grew louder. On the next day's episode of The View, she addressed the controversy briefly, her tone defiant. "Look, I asked the questions people want answers to," she said. "If a guest can't handle that, maybe they shouldn't come on." But the audience reaction was icy. Applause was muted, and the online backlash doubled. Critics accused her of arrogance, of turning an interview into a personal vendetta. Editorials poured in. One major entertainment column blasted her approach as a masterclass in how to lose the room. Another called Wahlberg's walkout a victory of restraint over provocation. Talk show hosts across networks debated it. One late-night monologue joked, "Mark Wahlberg went on The View to promote his new film, but ended up starring in an unscripted sequel, The Departed." From the set, The line got laughs, but the punchline underscored the reality. The clash had transcended the show itself. Behind the scenes, ABC executives reportedly weren't happy. Ratings for the episode were through the roof, but producers worried about alienating high-profile guests. If Wahlberg, a seasoned professional, could be pushed to walk off, who might refuse to come on at all? Meetings were held, memos circulated, and strategies discussed. Joy's defenders insisted controversy was good for ratings, but others argued, at what cost? For Mark, however, the outcome was clear. He emerged from the storm with his reputation burnished, not bruised. Instead of looking like an angry celebrity lashing out, he came across as controlled, composed, and unwilling to sacrifice dignity for entertainment. A week later, during a red carpet interview for his film, a reporter asked him about the incident. Mark gave a small smile, shook his head, and said, "I went there to talk about a movie. Things went sideways. That happens. I said what I needed to say, and I walked out. End of story." It was an end of story for everyone else, though. Clips of the moment continued to circulate, resurfacing whenever discussions about toxic talk shows came up. Media analysts called it a turning point in how celebrities navigate hostile interviews. Fans dubbed it the day Mark Wahlberg showed Hollywood what self-respect looks like. Joy Behar, for her part, never fully escaped the shadow of the incident. For months, anytime her name trended, the Walkout resurfaced. It became shorthand for daytime TV gone too far, for the fine line between hard questions and hostility. And for Mark Wahlberg, it became a defining moment, not of weakness, but of control. The Boston kid who grew up fighting for everything had proven, in front of millions, that sometimes the strongest move isn't to fight back. It's to stand tall, keep your dignity intact, and walk away. The clip ended up archived in countless top 10 talk show meltdowns countdowns on YouTube, replayed again and again with dramatic commentary. But for those who had watched it live, nothing could compare to the raw electricity of that moment. The sharp questions, the boiling tension, the steady rise until the dam broke and Wahlberg rose from his seat. The audience's gasp, the scrape of the chair, the words, calm but final, not running, walking away with my dignity. That line alone would echo for years.